Welcome to this deep dive, tailored just for you, the learner. Today we're looking at something truly fundamental. This idea that the people around us, they act like mirrors, reflecting parts of ourselves back to us, often in ways we just don't expect.
Yes, and it's more than just a casual reflection we might glance at.
Mhm.
These interactions, they can actually reveal hidden landscapes within our own identities.
Hidden landscapes, I like that.
And they significantly influence how we eventually come to understand ourselves.
So our goal today, our mission, is really to explore why we sometimes feel like we lose our sense of self in others,
Yeah.
and maybe more importantly,
Yes.
what can these reflections actually teach us? About our core nature, maybe, hopefully offering you, the learner, a fresh way to see your relationships and your own self-perception.
It's a rich area to explore.
Okay, let's jump right in, maybe with a bit of a thought experiment.
Okay.
Imagine standing in front of a mirror, standard stuff,
Right.
but the face you see,
Yeah.
it's not yours. It's someone else's entirely.
Right.
What unsettling or maybe even, I don't know, eye-opening ideas might that spark about what a mirror truly is?
Yeah.
As a kind of gateway to self-awareness.
That immediately forces you to reconsider the mirror, doesn't it? It's suddenly not just this straightforward objective surface anymore.
Right. Not simple at all.
Seeing another's face. Well, it suggests that the mirror holds a potential for unexpected insight. It prompts us to question whether our own identity is as fixed as we tend to believe.
Or maybe something much more fluid,
Right.
relational.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Far more fluid.
Yeah.
And deeply relational.
And that leads us naturally, I think, to a broader question. What if the people we meet, every day, what if they're also these kinds of mirrors, reflecting not just our outward appearance, obviously, but much deeper, maybe less conscious aspects of who we really are?
It's a powerful extension of the metaphor.
So why do you think we sometimes feel like we just dissolve into others? And what can these human mirrors ultimately reveal about our authentic selves?
Well, what's fascinating here, and maybe helpful for you, the learner, is that it touches upon the very core of how we develop self-knowledge in the first place.
How so?
We are fundamentally social beings. Our sense of self is just so deeply woven into the fabric of our interactions, always,
Right from the start.
right from the start. So
Okay.
that feeling of losing oneself, it can emerge when we maybe over-identify with that reflected image we see in others, perhaps prioritizing external approval over our own internal sense of truth. But here's the opportunity. The learning arises when we realize that these reflections, even the ones that feel distorted or negative,
Yeah.
they can actually point towards parts of ourselves we haven't yet brought fully into the light, haven't acknowledged.
So the takeaway, maybe, even our strongest reactions to people, the ones that really push our buttons,
Exactly.
they could be incredibly informative about our own inner world.
Absolutely. Often more informative about us than about them, paradoxically.
That makes so much sense when you put it like that. Okay, now, thinking about this social mirror, let's consider who we are when no one else is watching.
Okay.
Picture yourself totally alone. Maybe that classic deserted island scenario. Which of your qualities, things like kindness, ambition, creativity, your sense of humor, which do you think would still be there without an audience?
That's a powerful way to get to the heart of it. It really compels us to differentiate, doesn't it, between the parts of ourselves that are, let's say, intrinsically driven and those that are more about performance or maybe social conditioning.
Or what we do versus who we are.
Qualities like kindness, maybe creativity, they might endure because they often spring from a truly internal source. But something like ambition or even humor, that might feel quite different without anyone else around.
Yeah, humor definitely needs someone to laugh, usually.
It really makes you consider the various masks we wear, doesn't it? Shaped by society, family expectations, cultural norms.
Invisible masks. That becomes so ingrained we kind of forget they're even there.
And we start mistaking them for our true selves.
Exactly. Now, you mentioned this idea of being seen. Think about a time you felt really, truly seen by another person, maybe a close friend, a partner, maybe even a stranger sometimes. Someone who just seemed to get you on a deep level.
Yeah.
How did that feel? More alive, more real?
Oh, the experience of being genuinely seen is, well, it's profoundly validating. It's as if our internal reality, the one we live inside, is being acknowledged and mirrored back accurately.
Yes.
It affirms our existence, our authenticity. It can create such a powerful sense of connection and undoubtedly make us feel more vibrant, more alive.
Definitely.
However, and this is crucial, maybe particularly for you, the learner, as you reflect on this, there's a delicate balance. while being seen can illuminate us, becoming overly dependent on that external validation, that can seriously distort our own self-perception. It can lead us away from our own internal compass.
Ah, so it's a paradox.
It's a real paradox, that deep, fundamental human need to be seen, existing right alongside the potential danger of being too defined by another person's gaze.
It truly is. Wow. Okay, let's explore maybe why we might merge with others in the first place.
Yeah,
You mentioned earlier that we're relational beings from the very, very beginning.
absolutely. Foundational.
Could you expand on that initial maybe lack of clear boundaries between ourselves and the world, like in early infancy?
Certainly. From the moment we're born, our survival literally hinges on connection. There isn't really a distinct boundary perceived between the infant and the caregiver, especially the primary one.
It's all kind of one system.
Needs are met almost as if from a single source. Food appears, comfort happens. This foundational experience of profound interconnectedness, it leaves a lasting imprint.
For life.
Pretty much. Even as we develop a separate sense of I, that primal drive for relationship, for connection, remains deeply embedded. We are fundamentally wired for connection.
And that sometimes shows up as blurred boundaries later on.
It can, yes. It can manifest as a blurring of boundaries in our adult relationships, especially when needs feel particularly strong or unmet.
And this is where you mentioned the Gestalt concept of figure ground comes in.
Precisely.
How does that help us understand why we might lose ourselves or feel like we're losing ourselves in others?
Okay, imagine a visual field. Anything you look at.
Yeah.
The figure is what stands out, what captures your attention, right? While the ground is everything else, the background context.
Got it.
In relationships, it's incredibly easy for the other person, their needs, their desires, their stories, their dramas, to become the dominant figure.
They grab the spotlight.
Exactly. They take center stage in our awareness. Now, when this pattern repeats consistently, our own inner landscape, our own needs, feelings, thoughts, that's the grounds. It can become less and less visible, even to ourselves.
We lose sight of our own figure.
We lose sight of our own internal figure, yes. Think of it this way. Perhaps for you, the learner, when you're overly focused on someone else's life, their problems, they become that vivid figure, and your own inner needs, your feelings, they fade into that blurry ground. And over time, that ground can become so indistinct, so murky, that you actually lose touch with what's truly important to you.
Wow. That's a really clear way to put it. It's like, in those really intense romantic relationships, that feeling of finding your other half. We hear phrases like, they complete me all the time. What's the Gestalt perspective on feelings like that?
Well, what's insightful here is acknowledging how powerful and genuinely joyful those feelings can be. There's immense beauty in deep connection.
Of course.
But from a Gestalt perspective, those very phrases, other half complete me, can sometimes mask a dissolution of healthy, necessary boundaries.
How so?
The idea of being completed by another person might actually suggest an underlying lack of internal wholeness to begin with, a sense of something missing inside. We might unconsciously project our unmet needs onto the other person, hoping, maybe even expecting, that they will fill that perceived void within us.
So it creates this illusion.
Exactly. This merging can create a temporary and often very compelling illusion of wholeness. But if that other person is removed or the relationship dynamic shifts significantly, that illusion can shatter, and it can leave a really painful sense of emptiness, confusion, a real lack of clarity about one's own independent identity. It's almost like we've handed over the keys to our own sense of self.
That resonates deeply.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about something maybe a bit more shadowy. The idea of projecting our inner world onto other people.
Projection. Yeah.
What exactly is projection in a psychological sense?
Yeah.
And how does it play into this whole social mirror idea we're exploring?
Projection, at its core, is an unconscious psychological defense mechanism. It's where we take our own unacceptable or uncomfortable thoughts, feelings, desires, or characteristics.
The stuff we don't like about ourselves.
Often, yes. The stuff we find difficult to acknowledge directly and we attribute it to someone else, it's fundamentally a way of disowning aspects of ourselves.
So the takeaway here might be those really strong negative reactions we have to others. They might actually be like flashy neon signs.
Yeah.
Pointing to aspects of us we're unwilling to look at.
It's a fantastic way to put it. Flashing neon signs. It often becomes less about them and much more about us, doesn't it?
Wow, okay. You gave an example earlier, meeting someone new who reminds you of a childhood bully, and it triggers all these old emotions.
Yeah.
Could you elaborate a bit on how that's projection in action?
Yeah.
How does that work?
Okay, so in that kind of scenario, the new person might possess some subtle characteristic, maybe just the tone of voice, a particular facial expression, a way of standing.
Something tiny.
Often tiny, yes.
Mm.
Something that unconsciously triggers a deeply buried memory and the associated feelings of the original bully. Now, instead of recognizing that the intensity of the emotional reaction belongs to the past
Right.
and is being activated within oneself now,
Right.
that feeling gets projected outward onto the new person.
So we see them as the source.
We might then perceive them as threatening or aggressive or dismissive, whatever the old wound was, even if their actual objective behavior doesn't warrant that strong reaction at all. We're essentially seeing our own unresolved fear or anger or hurt reflected back at us, but we mistakenly believe it's originating entirely from this new individual.
And how does this tie back to that figure ground idea we were just discussing? How does projection mess with that?
Well, through a Gestalt lens, projection fundamentally blurs the clarity between figure and ground. It muddies the waters.
How so?
Instead of perceiving the other person clearly as the distinct figure they are in this present moment, we overlay them with our own unfinished business, those unresolved emotions, past experiences, old stories.
So the figure gets distorted.
The figure gets distorted, yes. And this also obscures our own internal state, the ground preventing us from recognizing the true source of our intense reactions, which lies within our own history and unresolved issues.
It's like the external world just becomes a stage, kind of, for our own internal dramas to play out.
That's a very apt way to describe it.
But hang on, it's not all negative, is it? These mirrors, they can't just show us the shadowy stuff. Can they also show us positive things? Possibilities we hadn't even considered within ourselves.
Oh, absolutely. It's crucial to remember that relationships aren't solely about reflecting back what already exists or the difficult stuff. They can also illuminate potential.
Potential.
Yes, showing us aspects of ourselves we haven't yet discovered, or maybe haven't fully embraced or owned yet. Think again about being alone on that deserted island.
Okay.
Without others around to perhaps reflect certain qualities back to us. Maybe qualities they admire in us or qualities they elicit from us we might never even realize we possess them or that they are valuable.
So interactions actually draw things out of us.
Precisely. Relationships can push us beyond our self-imposed limitations, nudge us out of our comfort zones. So ultimately, the learner, it's about consciously engaging with others, yes, as mirrors, but using that temporary external perspective to illuminate our blind spots, not about losing ourselves entirely in their reflection.
Can you give maybe some concrete examples of how that positive reflection might happen?
Sure. Consider someone who genuinely believes they're not particularly creative, never picked up a paintbrush, thinks they can't draw a stick figure,
Yeah, I know that feeling.
but then through a relationship with a highly creative individual, a friend, a partner, they might find themselves encouraged, maybe gently nudged, to explore artistic outlets they'd never even considered. And perhaps they discover a hidden talent, or at least a deep enjoyment they never knew was possible.
Okay, I can see that.
Or someone who's quite risk-averse, always plays it safe. They might partner with someone more adventurous, and through that connection, through shared experiences, they might find the courage to step outside their comfort zone, try new things, and reveal a previously dormant, adventurous spirit within themselves.
And mentors too, right?
Absolutely. A good mentor often sees potential in you that you haven't yet recognized in yourself. They guide you towards developing skills and talents you didn't know you possessed, reflecting and a capable, growing version of you.
That's a much more empowering way to think about these reflections. Now, you mentioned something earlier that's, well, it's a tough one to accept. That sometimes the people who irritate us the most, they might actually be holding up the clearest mirrors. Ugh. How does that dynamic work?
Yes, that can be challenging to embrace. But what's often insightful there is that those really strong negative reactions, the things that just get under our skin about someone else,
Yeah.
they frequently point directly to denied or disowned traits within ourselves, aspects we don't like or are afraid of.
Like what? Give me an example.
Okay, say we judge someone harshly for being incredibly selfish, constantly putting themselves first. That strong judgment might arise because we have a hidden fear of our own potential selfishness, or perhaps because we suppress our own needs to an unhealthy degree. Always putting others first and seeing someone else prioritize themselves triggers resentment about our own lack of self-care.
Ah, I see.
Seeing that trait displayed so clearly, so irritatingly, in another person forces us, if we're willing to look, to confront that disowned aspect within ourselves. It's not about condoning bad behavior in others.
Right, it's not an excuse for them.
Not at all. It's about acknowledging that the capacity for that trait, that behavior, exists within the broad spectrum of our own humanity. It's ultimately about reclaiming the whole self, the integrated self, even the parts we don't particularly like or admire.
Wow. Okay. So if everyone around us is acting as a mirror in some way, reflecting different parts, projecting things, it really makes you wonder, who are you? Like underneath all these reflections, are we just a collection of what others project onto us or see in us? Or is there more constant core essence somewhere in there?
That's a profound question, isn't it? It really gets to the heart of identity. The answer, I believe, lies in the dynamic interplay. It's not either. It's the interplay between our, let's say, inherent nature, our core tendencies, and the undeniable influence of our relationships. Our sense of self is undoubtedly shaped, refined, challenged, expanded through our interactions and the reflections we receive.
But we're not just passive.
Exactly. We are not merely passive recipients of these reflections. Crucially, we possess agency.
Agency.
The capacity to choose how we interpret those reflections, whether we internalize them wholesale or whether we critically examine them in light of our own inner knowing, our own values.
So as we kind of discussed earlier, losing ourselves in others, that's really about surrendering that agency, letting the external mirror dictate who we are.
Precisely. Surrendering that agency means allowing the reflected image, whether it's positive or negative, to define our identity without our conscious participation, without our critical evaluation.
Have the alternative.
Conversely, actively, consciously engaging with the reflection, asking, what does this show me? Is this true? What part of this resonates? What part feels off? That empowers us. It allows us to use the reflection as valuable information, as a catalyst for greater self-understanding and personal growth,
Leading to a more integrated self.
ultimately leading to a more integrated and autonomous sense of self. And this, I think, brings us naturally to a deeper level of understanding, exploring the specific mechanisms, particularly from a Gestalt perspective, that really illuminate how these processes unfold in our relationships.
Right. Okay, let's delve into that. You started with the concept of the field of perception. Can you explain a bit more what that means, especially in the context of our relationships and how we perceive each other within them?
Okay, let's go back to that foggy meadow metaphor we touched on.
Yeah.
The field, in Gestalt terms, is that whole encompassing environment, the shared space where we experience ourselves and others. It's not just empty space between us, it's a dynamic, interconnected web.
A web of...
Perceptions, feelings, assumptions, histories, behaviors, everything that's present in the interaction. And within relationships, the boundaries between individuals in that field can become more or less permeable, like the horizon blurring in the fog.
Okay.
Our perceptions, our emotions, our actions, they all occur within this shared relational field. So when we feel like we're losing ourselves in another, it's as if those individual boundaries within the field temporarily dissolve, and the sense of we overshadows the distinct sense of I.
And within this field, we've got that figure-ground dynamic again. How does the field itself actively influence what pops out as figure and what just stays in the background as ground in our relationships?
The field itself exerts an organizing influence. Our current needs, our anxieties, maybe our hopes for the relationship, what feels most noticeable or salient about the other person at any given moment, all these factors within the field contribute to what emerges as the figure, what grabs our immediate attention.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Let's say we're feeling insecure in a relationship. Within that field of insecurity, we might become hyper-focused on any perceived signs of disapproval from our partner. A neutral expression on their face might suddenly become the prominent figure, interpreted negatively.
While our own insecurity.
Our own underlying anxiety, the source of the interpretation, fades into the background, becoming the less noticed ground. The field, in essence, shapes where our focus of awareness lands.
You used codependency earlier as an example of this imbalance. Could you elaborate on how one person becoming the constant figure affects the other person, the one who seems to recede into the ground?
Yes, in many codependent dynamics, one person consistently prioritizes the other's needs, feelings, and problems to the significant detriment of their own. The needs, the crises, the emotions of the dependent person become the central dominant figure in the relational field,
Demanding all the attention.
constantly demanding attention, energy, resources. The codependent person, in turn, tends to recede into the background. Their own needs, desires, opinions, even their sense of self become unacknowledged, unmet, less important. faded.
And the result?
This chronic imbalance leads to a fragmentation of the self for the codependent individual, a gradual loss of their own wholeness as they become primarily defined by their role in supporting the other person's prominent figure.
That sounds exhausting and really sad. You also introduced the principle of isomorphism, that idea of a structural correspondence between our inner and outer worlds.
Yes, isomorphism.
How does that principle help explain why we might be particularly drawn to certain people, maybe to the point of losing ourselves in their reflections?
Well, what's truly insightful here with isomorphism is that when someone in our external environment in our field reflects qualities back to us, qualities that resonate strongly with our own unresolved inner tensions or unacknowledged parts of ourselves, it creates a kind of energetic pull.
Like attracts like.
Or not necessarily like attracts like, but resonance. If we deeply yearn, for instance, to be more assertive, but we suppress that part of ourselves, we might be intensely drawn to someone who exudes confidence, who speaks their mind freely, almost effortlessly.
They become a mirror.
They become a living mirror of who we perhaps long to be, or a part we admire but haven't integrated. Conversely, if we harbor deep-seated fears of inadequacy, we might be hyper-attuned to any perceived criticism from others, seeing it as a direct reflection, confirming our own inner anxieties.
So these resonances grab our attention.
These isomorphic resonances absolutely draw our attention. They make certain people stand out as figures, and they can lead us to over-identify with the reflected image, blurring the lines between their experience and our own inner state, potentially leading to that feeling of losing ourselves.
That makes a lot of intuitive sense. It really feels like we're seeking something outside to fix something inside. You also touched upon the human yearning for completeness versus wholeness. What's the really crucial difference between those two in Gestalt terms?
The yearning for completeness, you see, often involves seeking something external, trying to find something outside ourselves to fill a perceived gap, a void, an emptiness within.
Like finding the missing puzzle piece.
Exactly. It's about achieving a sense of closure, of being finished, through an outside source, finding that missing piece in another person, or a job, or an achievement. Wholeness, on the other hand, that's a more integrated and fundamentally internal state.
Okay, how so?
Wholeness involves acknowledging, accepting, and crucially, integrating all the different parts of ourselves, the good, the bad, the ugly, the strong, the vulnerable, even the seemingly contradictory parts. It's about achieving internal coherence and self-acceptance, rather than relying on external supplementation for a sense of being whole.
You gave the example of Alex, remember? He admired Jamie's emotional openness, but then started feeling kind of diminished by it.
Yes, Alex and Jamie.
How does their story illustrate this search for completeness versus the journey towards wholeness?
Well, Alex, having learned early on to suppress his own vulnerability, was initially drawn to Jamie's very outward emotional expressiveness.
Okay.
It was attractive, maybe exciting. Unconsciously, perhaps, he was hoping that by being close to her, he could vicariously experience that emotional freedom he felt he lacked.
So she represented something missing.
She became the figure embodying the very trait he felt was missing, incomplete in himself. However, because Alex hadn't yet done the internal work of acknowledging and integrating his own capacity for vulnerability,
Yeah.
Jamie's openness, paradoxically, started to serve as a constant, perhaps uncomfortable and unconscious reminder of his own perceived incompleteness, his lack of integration, and that likely led to those feelings of being diminished in her presence.
So he was projecting.
He was projecting his own longing for emotional wholeness onto Jamie, mistakenly believing that her presence, her being, could somehow provide what he actually needed to cultivate within himself.
Right. So true wholeness really is an inside job. It comes from accepting and integrating all those fragmented parts of ourselves rather than looking for someone else to magically complete us.
Precisely. It's about internal integration, not external completion.
Okay. Now, let's shift focus slightly to the power of attention itself. You mentioned attention as a creative force. How does where we direct our attention contribute to this whole phenomenon of losing ourselves in others?
Attention in Gestalt psychology isn't seen as just passively receiving information. It's viewed as an active, creative force. Whatever we consciously focus on in our perceptual field becomes amplified, becomes more real, more vivid in our experience.
So where attention goes, energy flows.
Yeah.
Kind of idea.
Something like that, yes. So when our attention is predominantly directed outward, towards another person focusing intently on their thoughts, their feelings, their needs, their experiences, our awareness of our own internal state, our own ground, naturally diminishes. It's kind of dynamic trade-off in our conscious awareness.
You mentioned the idea of narrowed attention during really deep, engaging conversations. Is that always a bad thing in relationships?
Not necessarily, no. Focused attention is absolutely crucial for genuine connection, for empathy, for deep understanding in any meaningful relationship. We need to be able to focus on the other person.
Yeah.
But when this narrowed attention becomes a habitual default pattern and we consistently prioritize the other person's internal landscape over our own without coming back to ourselves, that's when it can create a kind of perceptual tunnel vision.
Tunnel vision.
Yes. We become fixated on the other person, their figure dominates entirely, and our own needs, values, feelings, experiences, or ground fade completely into the periphery of our awareness. It's when this becomes the default mode of relating that we really risk losing touch with our own internal compass and sense of self within the relationship.
And this connects back to the example of Sarah, right, with her colleague Alex.
Exactly.
How did her fixed attention on his outspokenness reinforce her own feelings of inadequacy?
Because Sarah's own deep-seated need for validation and her suppressed anger and desire to speak up, all residing in her unacknowledged ground, weren't being attended to. So her attention became fixated on Alex's perceived confidence, his ability to speak freely, his figure.
And she compared herself.
She unconsciously interpreted his behavior as the standard and therefore as a measure of her own perceived inadequacy. Her narrowed focus on Alex reinforced her belief that she was somehow less capable or less worthy, a belief rooted fundamentally in her own unmet need for external approval and her difficulty accessing her own voice. She wasn't attending to her own internal resources or exploring her own unique ways of being assertive.
So the antidote to this, then, is what you called expanding awareness, consciously bringing our focus back to include ourselves, our ground, as well as the other person, the figure.
Precisely. Expanding awareness involves intentionally broadening our attentional lens. It means cultivating the capacity to hold awareness of both the figure, the other person, the interaction, and the ground, our own internal sensations, feelings, thoughts, needs, simultaneously, or at least fluidly moving between them.
And what does that achieve?
This allows us to perceive others more clearly, hopefully without the distorting influence of our unexamined projections and unmet needs. And crucially, it helps us stay grounded in our own sense of self, our own internal experience, even while being deeply engaged in the dynamic of the interaction.
Now, all this understanding of the dynamics, the field, figure, ground, attention, projection, it's incredibly helpful conceptually. But what's the actual catalyst for real transformation? You mentioned insight, that crucial aha moment.
Yes, insight.
How does insight typically occur in the context of our relationships, especially around this process of potentially losing ourselves?
Insight is that sudden, often illuminating flash of clarity. It's when previously disconnected pieces of our experience, feelings, thoughts, memories, observations of patterns, suddenly click together to form a coherent, meaningful whole. A new understanding emerges.
The light bulb moment.
Exactly. In the context of relationships, it often involves recognizing our own patterns of projection for what they are, becoming aware of the specific unmet needs we've been unconsciously trying to fulfill through others, or seeing clearly, for the first time perhaps, how our habitual patterns of attention have been shaping our perceptions and reactions.
Like finally seeing the pattern.
Yes. It's that moment when we see the dynamic clearly. Aha, I realize now. My intense reaction to them isn't really just about what they're doing right now. It's connected to this unresolved experience from my past that's being triggered. Or, aha, I keep seeking approval from this person because I haven't learned to give it to myself.
And that recognition, it does something.
That recognition can bring a powerful sense of release. It often shifts the locus of control back to ourselves. It's not just happening to us, we see our part in it. And that awareness empowers us to make different choices going forward.
You revisited the story of Alex and his breakthrough in therapy. Can you remind us how that moment of insight actually unfolded for him? What was the aha?
Alex's pivotal insight, his aha moment, occurred when he finally recognized, really felt the truth, that his intense admiration mixed with that feeling of being diminished by Jamie's emotional openness. It wasn't actually about Jamie as a person, fundamentally.
It was about him.
It was a direct reflection of his own deeply suppressed emotions and his profound longing for that same kind of freedom of expression within himself. The clear understanding was, her being emotionally available was triggering his own awareness of his self-imposed emotional limitations. That was the insight.
And how did that specific insight then lead to a more profound transformation for him in his life, his relationship?
Well, that insight became a major turning point. It shifted everything. Instead of continuing to unconsciously sort of lean on Jamie, expecting her to vicariously fulfill his unmet emotional needs, He took conscious responsibility.
He took ownership.
He took ownership for his own emotional growth and well-being. He actively began to engage with his suppressed feelings, maybe through practices like journaling, mindfulness, perhaps talking more openly in therapy, or with trusted friends. He gradually started to allow himself, bit by bit, to express vulnerability in his interactions.
And the outcome.
He ultimately discovered that the sense of wholeness, that emotional freedom he was seeking, wasn't something Jamie or anyone else could magically provide for him. It had to come from within himself, from accepting and integrating all aspects of his own emotional landscape, the comfortable and the uncomfortable.
It's such a powerful reminder, isn't it, that true and lasting change really originates from that internal shift, that insight, that awareness.
It truly does.
Now, this leads us to what you described as the paradox of connection. The idea that sometimes, maybe even often, in the very process of feeling like we're losing ourselves in others, we can paradoxically stumble upon a deeper understanding of ourselves.
Yes, the paradox.
How does that seemingly contradictory process actually work?
The paradox lies in this. By temporarily stepping outside of our usual, habitual, self-referential frame, our normal way of seeing things from inside our own head, and deeply, perhaps empathically, engaging with another person's experience, their world, we can gain new and sometimes startlingly unexpected perspectives on ourselves.
Viewing ourselves from the outside.
Almost, yes. It's like using another person or the relationship itself as a temporary external mirror to reflect aspects of ourselves, beliefs, patterns, potentials that are typically hidden from our direct view, maybe residing in our blind spots.
But there's a condition.
The crucial element here, for it to be growthful, is that this losing ideally needs to occur with some degree of conscious awareness or intentionality, or at least be reflected upon later. It shouldn't solely come from a desperate unconscious need to be completed or defined by the other person. It's more about merging with awareness, perhaps.
You also introduced the concept of resonance, that kind of mutual influence, that vibe within a relationship field. What makes the difference between healthy resonance and a more distorted or, well, unhealthy form?
Healthy resonance is characterized by a reciprocal and balanced exchange. A mutual influence where each person's authentic self, their uniqueness, is acknowledged and respected. It fosters growth and understanding for both individuals involved.
Like a balanced dance.
Exactly. It's a dynamic where both individuals are able to be both figure and ground at different times, responsive to each other and the situation. Distorted resonance, on the other hand, that often involves one person's needs or their projections or their anxieties consistently dominating the relational field.
Creating a balance.
Creating a significant imbalance, yes, where one individual consistently loses their sense of self, their own ground, in the other's narrative or needs. This tends to lead to stagnation, maybe resentment, because the individuals aren't truly seeing each other as separate whole beings. Mutual growth gets stifled.
And then there's the concept of contact. You described it as that full engagement with the present moment, with our own internal experience and the experience of the other person. Why is cultivating genuine contact so crucial for healthy relationships and for maintaining our sense of self within them?
Genuine contact is really the space, the fertile ground, where authentic connection truly flourishes. It requires us to be fully present, here and now, attuned to our own internal sensations, feelings, thoughts.
Our ground.
Yes, our ground. While simultaneously being open, curious, and receptive to the experience of the other person, their figure, their ground, it inherently involves vulnerability.
Vulnerability. How so?
Allowing ourselves to be seen as we truly are, maybe without the usual masks or defenses, and equally striving to see the other person with fresh eyes as much as possible, free from the distortions of our projections, assumptions, and past experiences.
And what happens in that space?
Through this kind of authentic contact, we move beyond simply seeing others as mere reflections of our own insecurities or unmet needs. We start to experience them as fellow travelers, as partners in co-creating meaning and understanding. It's in this space of genuine contact that we can see the boundaries clearly, both our own and the others, fostering both deep intimacy and healthy autonomy.
So as we've explored all these different Gestalt mechanisms, the field, figure grounds, attention, projection, insight, resonance, contact, it's quite a list. What would you say is the central, maybe the overarching takeaway for the learner about how our relationships function as these incredibly powerful and sometimes really perplexing mirrors to our souls?
I think the fundamental insight the learner is to really grasp, to recognize that our relationships are these dynamic, living, ever-evolving fields. They are constantly being shaped by these intricate psychological mechanisms, whether we're aware of it or not.
So others are mirrors.
Others are indeed mirrors, yes. But this is the key. What they reflect back to us is rarely, if ever, a simple, objective, clear image like a glass mirror.
It's more complex.
It's far more complex. It's a constantly shifting, often surprising interplay of our own unconscious projections, our deeply held unmet needs, our habitual patterns of attention, and the genuine, unique essence of the other person interacting with all of that.
So the big question becomes,
The crucial question then becomes, what are these complex, multifaceted mirrors ultimately reflecting back to us? Are they showing us primarily our deepest fears, our most cherished aspirations, our hidden, untapped potential? Or perhaps something even more profound and evolving truth about who we are and who we are constantly becoming within this intricate tapestry of our connections?
and that, I think, leads us perfectly into the final part of our exploration today.
Yes, moving beyond the reflection itself.
Right, part 3, the infinite reflection, discovering the self beyond the mirror. You started this section with that really powerful metaphor, the still lake, perfectly mirroring the sky.
Mm-hmm.
And then the ripples,
Yeah.
the distortion that disrupts that perfect image. Is that distortion, those ripples, necessarily a negative thing, a betrayal of the true reflection? Or could it, maybe, reveal a deeper truth about reflection itself?
That really is the central inquiry as we wrap up. What if those ripples, those moments of distortion, confusion, the times when we feel we're losing ourselves in another person, what if they aren't a failure of the mirroring process at all?
But something else.
But rather a more profound, more nuanced revelation about the very nature of reflection in human relationships? What if that temporary blurring of boundaries, those instances of intense connection, even that perceived loss of self, what if they actually offer a unique, maybe even essential, opportunity for deep transformation?
Opportunity.
Where every projection we catch, every moment of feeling dissolved, actually holds a hidden key, a seed of potential for unlocking a more complete, more integrated understanding of our truest nature.
You brought back the example of Alex again after his breakthrough about projecting onto Jamie. How did his increased awareness actually shift the nature of the mirror that existed between them? Did the mirror break?
Not break, no. It transformed. As Alex cultivated that greater awareness, recognizing his projections, understanding his unmet needs, he began to see Janie differently. Not primarily as someone who completed him or someone who merely reflected his perceived lack,
Daz.
but as a separate, complex, fascinating individual, someone with her own rich inner world, her own needs, her own strengths and vulnerabilities, quite independent of his own narrative about her.
And that changed things.
This shift in his awareness fundamentally transformed both his self-perception and his perception of Janie. He moved away from seeing her through that distorted lens of his own needs and projections and started to experience her more as a true co-creator in their relationship, a partner.
So the relationship deepened.
This newfound clarity actually deepened their bond, but in a much healthier, more sustainable way. It evolved their connection away from a place of potential dependency and towards one of mutual empowerment, respect for individuality, real contact.
And the mirror itself.
What was quite remarkable and illustrates the point is that even with this increased self-awareness, the mirror of their relationship continued to reflect. But what it reflected changed. Now, it reflected possibilities for shared growth, for deeper intimacy based on authenticity, rather than simply highlighting what Alex had previously felt was missing within himself.
So it shows that temporary loss of self, when processed with awareness,
Yes.
can actually lead to expansion, not just annihilation of the self.
Precisely. Expansion, integration, a larger sense of self.
So that temporary feeling of being lost can actually pave the way for a more authentic, maybe more expansive understanding of who we are. Now, you revisited isomorphism too, but through a more philosophical lens this time, describing it as a feedback loop.
Yes, between self and others.
How does this infinite loop continuously shape who we are in the world? It sounds quite profound.
Think of it as an ongoing, incredibly intricate dance, where every single interaction we have, however small or seemingly insignificant, leaves a subtle, often unconscious imprint on us. And it gradually reshapes both individuals involved in the exchange.
A constant reshaping.
It's a continuous feedback loop. Our internal world, our beliefs, feelings, assumptions, influences how we interact with others, and their responses to us, how they mirror us back in turn, shape our inner landscape, our self-perception, even our future behaviors and choices. It's constant.
You use the metaphor of a Mobius strip.
Yes, that intriguing mathematical object, a single-sided surface that twists and loops back on itself, endlessly offering new perspectives with each turn along its path, yet the journey along its single surface never truly ends.
And relationships are like that.
Our relationships, you could say, function much like these Mobius strips of identity formation, constantly challenging our assumptions about ourselves and others, subtly but surely reshaping who we are becoming. The self, therefore, isn't some fixed entity we finally arrive at.
That's process.
It's perpetually in the dynamic process of becoming through this continuous looping interplay with the world, with others, with the reflections we encounter.
That's a really profound and dynamic way to think about it, always becoming rather than just being. But if the self is constantly in flux like that, always changing, always being shaped, what does it really mean to talk about wholeness? Is that even an attainable state if we're never finished?
That's a fantastic question. Gestalt psychology offers a nuanced view here. Wholeness isn't seen as a static, fixed endpoint like reaching the summit of a mountain and planting a flag.
Not perfection.
Definitely not perfection. It's understood more as a dynamic, ever-evolving state of flow. It's about learning to embrace, even welcome, the inherent tensions that exist within us and within life.
Tensions like
The constant push and pull between self and other, between independence and connection, between our fragmented parts and our drive towards integration. Wholeness isn't about resolving these tensions once and for all, achieving some kind of perfect, static equilibrium,
but
rather about learning to skillfully, consciously dance with them, to find a sense of coherence, purpose, and meaning within their inherent complexity and dynamism.
you use the analogy of kintsugi, the Japanese art form.
Yes, kintsugi.
Yeah.
Repairing broken pottery, often with lacquer mixed with powdered gold, silver, or platinum. The cracks, the imperfections, the history of the breaks, they aren't hidden or disguised.
Go highlighted.
Exactly. They are highlighted, even celebrated as an integral part of the object's unique history and beauty, often making the piece stronger and more valuable than it was before it broke.
So our relationship breaks and repairs.
Similarly, our experiences in relationships, the breaks, the misunderstandings, the repairs, the moments of deep connection and painful separation all contribute to our individual wholeness. Not by erasing the marks, but by becoming integrated threads in the rich, complex, beautiful tapestry of our life story. Wholeness comes through integration, including the imperfections.
So it's about integrating all those experiences, the challenges, as well as the joys, rather than trying to erase or deny the difficult parts.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you posed a very direct, almost existential question earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Who are you without the mirror? Stripped of all those external reflections from others, what fundamentally remains? What's left?
That question really forces us to confront the core of our being, doesn't it? Independent of any external validation or reflection. And here, the philosophical perspective of someone like Søren Kierkegaard becomes quite relevant.
Kierkegaard. How so?
He viewed the self not as some pre-existing entity waiting to be discovered, but as a task, a project, something we actively create through our choices, our commitments, our actions, our passionate engagement with the world.
So the self is something we build.
Something we build moment by moment, choice by choice. And relationships in this view become absolutely essential tools, maybe even the primary materials, in this ongoing process of self-construction. Without them, without the interaction, the feedback, the challenge,
We risk stagnation.
we risk becoming stagnant, yes, trapped within a limited, unchallenged, perhaps even illusory view of ourselves. However, the caution remains.
Don't just.
It's equally crucial to avoid becoming overly reliant on the mirror of others, because that risks the loss of our own authentic voice, our own internal compass, our own unique direction.
So it's that balance again.
It's always about finding that delicate, dynamic, and continuous balance, using external reflections as valuable guideposts, as sources of information and growth, while staying firmly rooted in our own internal experience, our own values, our own emerging sense of truth.
That balance between external feedback and internal grounding. It really does seem absolutely key to navigating all of this complexity. And you concluded part 2 with a really thought-provoking final twist, asking if we are ultimately the reflector or the reflected
Yes.
in this intricate dance of relationships.
Yes.
Could you maybe unravel that final twist a bit more for us?
Let's go back one last time to the image of the lake. Reflecting the sky, the trees, the clouds, the landscape around it, it reflects everything that is present in its field, not just your individual image when you look into it.
So my reflection is part of a bigger picture.
Your reflection is just one part of a much larger interconnected tapestry of reflections. And here's the crucial, perhaps surprising, maybe even liberating insight. That mirror of relationship reflects not only who you are in this particular moment,
But also,
perhaps more importantly, who you could be, the possibilities. The people in our lives, they aren't just passive surfaces reflecting us back neutrally. They are active participants, co-creating our shared reality. And in doing so, they offer us glimpses, invitations, reflections of possibilities within ourselves that we might not have otherwise conceived of or imagined.
So when we lose ourselves,
So, in a way, when we lose ourselves in others through deep connection, empathy, or resonance, maybe we're not just disappearing or fragmenting. Maybe we're temporarily dissolving into a shared realm of potential and holding within that merged space the possibility for profound reinvention, for discovering new facets of ourselves.
but that requires something from us.
That reinvention, that growth ultimately requires courage. The courage to step into that uncertainty, that ambiguity of the blurred boundary, and perhaps a kind of trust. Trust that the seemingly disparate fragments, the old self and the new possibilities glimpsed in the mirror, will eventually coalesce into a new, more integrated pattern, a pattern that honors both our unique individuality and our fundamental, inescapable interconnectedness.
So ultimately, this lifelong journey of self-discovery through our relationships, it's an ongoing process, isn't it? Of questioning, of reflection, and just continuous becoming.
Absolutely. It's a continuous exploration, a lifelong dance of connection and separation, merging and individuating. The key, perhaps, is to remain perpetually curious.
Curious about.
To keep asking not only, what do the people in my life show me about myself, but also, what do they inspire me to imagine about the vast potential within myself? What invitations to grow are hidden in these interactions, even the difficult ones?
So the mirror sparks questions, not just answers.
Perhaps the most valuable function of the social mirror isn't actually to provide us with definitive, fixed answers about who we are, but rather to spark the very questions that lead us towards a deeper, more nuanced, more compassionate, and ever-evolving understanding of ourselves and the intricate, challenging, beautiful web of our human connections.
And maybe the self we're looking for.
And perhaps the self we are ultimately seeking isn't hidden somewhere behind the mirror at all, static and waiting to be found. Perhaps it's shimmering right there within the reflections, within the dynamic interplay itself, waiting for us to step a little closer, to look a little deeper, and to dare to truly see all that we are capable of becoming.
We hope this deep dive into the fascinating concept of the social mirror have offered you, the learner, some truly valuable insights, really, into the intricate ways we perceive ourselves through our ongoing interactions with others.
Yes, perhaps consider the profound power of your own attention. Where does it habitually go? Think about the subtle dynamics of projection that are always inevitably at play, and reflect on the remarkable potential for profound self-discovery that lies hidden within the landscape of your own relationships.
I strongly encourage you to take some time, maybe even right after this, to reflect on the various mirrors in your own life. Who are they? What do they seem to reflect? And what diverse possibilities might they be revealing about your own ever-evolving sense of self?
What new questions have emerged for you during this exploration? What aspects of yourself, or perhaps your relationships, might you feel inspired to explore further with maybe a bit more curiosity or courage?
Thank you so much for joining us on this journey of exploration today.
Thank you. Until our next deep dive, may you continue to observe with curiosity, question with courage, and learn with an open heart.